In the morning kitchen, I was slowly making toast while fighting back nausea. Though I was 5 months pregnant, my morning sickness should have eased by now. This morning was particularly rough. The bright July sunlight streaming through the window seemed to churn my stomach even more. Pressing my forehead against the cold marble counter offered a small measure of relief. "Kate, are you all right?" Michael's concerned voice came through my smartphone. "Yes, somehow." I tried to sound cheerful, but my voice came out weaker than I intended. "The baby's fine too. It moved a little this morning," I added, hearing a relieved sigh on the other end. Michael was away on a 3-week business trip as the project manager for a major IT initiative in Boston. Usually, his business trips only lasted a few days, but this time it was an important project with a new client. I understood it was a crucial opportunity for his career, but to me, right now, those 3 weeks felt like an eternity. Especially these morning hours in this house were the most unbearable. We'd been married for 2 years. Things weren't always like this. 2 years ago, while studying accounting at a prestigious university in Chicago, I met Michael at my best friend's wedding at the First Presbyterian Church of Greenwich. I was immediately drawn to his gentle smile and sincere personality. We shared our first conversation in the light streaming through the church's stained glass windows. After a year of dating, we exchanged vows in that same church. At the time, my mother-in-law, Patricia, outwardly blessed our marriage. A former high school teacher known as a pillar of the local church, she always maintained impeccable manners. At our wedding, she arranged top-tier catering and hosted a grand celebration with 300 guests. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law Jenny showed a reserved attitude at the wedding. Having gone through a divorce and moved back home, she appeared to welcome me as a new family member. We ended up living together in Michael's family home due to the house's size and, more importantly, my mother-in-law's strong wishes. The colonial revival-style house in Greenwich's quiet residential area was spacious enough for 4 people. With its row of white columns on the porch, well-maintained front yard, and antique furniture throughout, I tried my best to adjust to this elegant space with my new family. For the first 6 months, everything was fine. However, things began to change when they learned I was pregnant. My mother-in-law started showing obvious displeasure toward me when morning sickness left me unable to move. When I was pregnant, I managed to do all the housework, even with morning sickness, she would say, her words clearly filled with criticism. After Sunday services, she began casually bringing up my laziness during church gatherings. Jenny, my sister-in-law, gradually revealed her true nature as well. Though she should have been busy working as a real estate agent, she would return home just when I was feeling unwell, deliberately making loud noises and wearing strong perfume. She would carry expensive designer bags as if showing them off. Her attitude suggested that my illness was merely an act. Every time nausea hit, I desperately tried to endure it, even as my trips to the bathroom increased. I shuddered at the sound of ice being crushed. Their attitude remained unchanged. Neither of them showed any sign of trying to understand my suffering. Instead, they seemed to view my illness as an excuse for laziness. Lately, their gazes had grown especially cold. Even now, I find myself shrinking from the whispered voices of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law coming from across the kitchen. Michael is saying something on the phone, but my head feels foggy and distant. Life in this elegant mansion now feels like a heavy chain binding me. I can feel the atmosphere in this house growing heavier day by day. My husband's absence seems to amplify that weight. Feeling the baby move slightly inside me, I try to shake off my uneasy premonitions. The harsh summer sunlight streams mercilessly through gaps in the heavy damask curtains. Though the air conditioning is running, the air in the living room feels oddly heavy and suffocating. As the antique clock strikes 10, I lay on the leather sofa. The cheerful voice I had put on for Michael during our morning call now seems like a distant memory. The morning sickness won't subside, and dizziness and fatigue make my body feel like lead. Cold sweat runs down my back, and the sensation of my silk blouse sticking to my skin only intensifies my nausea. Outside, the cicada's persistent chirping seems to reverberate in my head. Even the pendulum sound of the grandfather clock supposedly inherited from my grandmother, now brings a queasiness that stirs my stomach. It's so hot today. I feel sick, I whispered softly, feeling the baby move faintly inside me. I reflexively placed my hand on my belly. Maybe if I just lie down, the nausea will ease. As I close my eyes and sigh deeply, I hear my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's voices from the entrance hall. Their voices ring out deliberately cheerful, as if ignoring my existence. Having finished their makeup in the master bedroom upstairs, the sound of their footsteps descends the stairs. Their Christian Louboutin heels strike the marble floor with regular, seemingly deliberate loudness, as if trying to aggravate my nausea. Those footsteps seem to symbolize my discomfort in this house. Still lying down, Patricia looks down at me with her perfectly made-up face. There isn't a trace of concern in her expression. Rather, it's thick with contempt. Behind her, Jenny gives me a meaningful look while touching up her Chanel lipstick. Their presence seemed to silently declare how out of place I was in this house. The strong scent of their perfumes wafts through the stuffy air. The clawing fragrance assaults my nostrils, bringing a new wave of nausea as I desperately try to hold it back. Patricia fixes me with a cold stare. Her eyes hold the same superiority she must have shown when looking down on students as a high school teacher. "Stop this pathetic behavior. You can do the housework." Her voice contained obvious irritation. "When I was pregnant, things were much harder, but I persevered for my family." Her words felt like another layer being added to the countless snide remarks she'd accumulated over time. Jenny takes out a small mirror from her designer handbag and speaks while ostentatiously fixing her hair. "Are you really feeling sick, or is it just an act?" Her words were clearly laced with sarcasm. The jealousy that had grown within her since her divorce was now directed at me as pure malice. As I feel almost crushed under their cold gazes, I desperately try to sit up. At that moment, a new wave of nausea hits, and I involuntarily grimace. Seeing my expression, Jenny's face twists into an obvious sneer. Her smile now openly displayed the hostility she had barely tried to conceal before. "If you're feeling sick, why don't you go to the hospital?" Patricia says in a malicious tone. But before that, she walks to the china cabinet and takes out an expensive porcelain plate. "Wash this. It's been sitting there since yesterday." The plate was part of a special set given as a wedding gift from the church women's group. Before I could respond, Jenny takes the plate. Her eyes had a strange gleam in them. It was like the harbinger of something that had been suppressed for a long time, about to be unleashed. "I'm going out. Keep the house clean." With those words, she hurled the plate at me. The white porcelain seemed to arc through the air in slow motion as I instinctively raised my arm to protect my face. A sharp pain shot through my left arm as the plate hit it and shattered, scattering pieces across the floor. The sound echoed through the house's silence like a thunderclap. "Oh my hand must have slipped." Jenny's voice held a smile, while enduring the intense pain. I clutched my left arm, seeing red stains slowly spreading across my blouse sleeve. That red stain seemed like all the suffering of these past days finally taking visible form. "That was your carelessness," Patricia coldly declared as she started walking toward the entrance. "Make sure you clean this up before we get back." Her words carried such everyday normality that it only highlighted the abnormality of the situation. The sound of their high heels faded away, and the heavy front door closed with a thud. Silence descended. The white fragments scattered on the floor gleamed pitifully in the morning light. They seemed to symbolize how our peaceful daily life had crumbled so easily. The pain in my left arm gradually became more dull and deep, but strangely, my mind was clear. The nausea and fear I'd been feeling seemed to have shattered along with the plate fragments. Instead, I felt an unfamiliar strength beginning to grow within me. After cleaning up the scattered plate fragments, I called an Uber and decided to visit the Greenwich Hospital emergency room. Even while waiting in the reception area, the pain in my left arm continued to strengthen my resolve. When I was shown to the examination room, it felt overly air-conditioned despite being a summer morning. I sat on the white examination table and slowly rolled up my blouse sleeve. Dull pain shot through with every movement. "Mrs. Thompson," A middle-aged female doctor addressed me politely. Dr. Sarah Walker's name tag gleamed quietly on her white coat. She carefully examined my arm and sighed deeply, her fingers trembling slightly as she entered her observations into the computer. "These are clearly signs of violence." Her voice mixed professional coolness with human warmth and concern. "May I take some photos? You might want to consider reporting this to the police. Violence against pregnant women is especially serious." I nodded quietly as the doctor photographed my bruises from various angles. The next steps I needed to take began to take clear shape in my mind with each click of the digital camera. I realized I had reached my limit of endurance. When I received the medical certificate, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly. It wasn't fear, but rather a determination about the actions I was about to take. While carefully organizing the diagnosis and photo data, Dr. Walker occasionally glanced at me with concern. "Where do you go for your prenatal checkups?" she asked. I told her the name of my clinic. "We should contact them too, for future reference." Before I left the examination room, Dr. Walker gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "You have more allies than you think." Those words gave me strength. Walking down the hospital corridor, I checked the time on my smartphone screen. It was just past 11:30 a.m. Shortly after, I started making calls from my car. First, I contacted Wright and Sons Moving Company, the most reputable moving company in Greenwich. The receptionist, sensing my urgency, responded immediately. As I listened to the explanation about emergency rates, I strengthened my resolve. "Yes, can you handle the move out today?" My voice was steadier than I had expected. While discussing the estimate, I checked the photos of the house deed from my grandfather's inheritance on my smartphone. Actually, this house had been purchased by my grandfather in my name. I had kept quiet about this fact at the time of my marriage to maintain smooth relations with my new family. Now that choice would unexpectedly save me. Next, I called another company, Express Movers, and simultaneously requested confirmation of the original deed stored at the bank. The bank clerk, seeming to sense the situation, promised to handle it as quickly as possible. While all the arrangements were being made, I sat calmly in the hospital parking lot, considering my next moves. Occasionally, I felt the baby move. I was confident this decision was the right one. At 2 p.m., the first moving truck arrived. As the large white truck parked in front of the house, the workers began moving efficiently. Hearing the noise, several housewives from the neighborhood gathered to see what was happening. They were people who had been troubled by my mother-in-law's high-handed attitude. "Kate, are you all right?" Sarah Henderson from across the street rushed over with concern, seeing the bandage on my arm. Her expression clouded. "We've been worried. Patricia has been especially difficult lately." "It's okay, we'll help," Linda Garner said, while helping sort kitchen items. Neighborhood women gathered one after another, quietly helping with the packing. Some even brought homemade lemonade and sandwiches. In this circle of warm support, I realized for the first time that I hadn't really been alone. The work progressed surprisingly smoothly. Important documents, clothing, and other items were packed into boxes and loaded onto the truck. One after another, Sarah carefully packed my precious photo albums, and Linda helped sort the kitchenware. With the help of neighbors, sorting and packing my belongings went more smoothly than expected. Though nausea hit me several times, Linda's lemon water had a surprisingly good effect. "This is a keepsake from my grandmother," I murmured while carefully packing an antique clock. Each item's associated memories resonated differently in my heart now than before. The movers too seemed especially careful, handling items, likely being considerate of my pregnant condition. By dusk, as the last furniture was being moved out, the house had become incredibly empty. The setting sun falling on the floor cast strange shadows in the empty rooms. The vases my mother-in-law had proudly displayed and my sister-in-law's collection of brand-name items had all been removed, leaving a refreshing silence in the rooms. The marks left on the walls, where paintings had hung, seemed somehow ironic. At the new apartment, the furniture was already arranged. It was the top floor of a luxury building, slightly removed from Greenwich Avenue. I had been able to sign the contract immediately for the pre-prepared new residence after stopping by the real estate office on my way from the hospital. Security was perfect, with 24-hour front desk staff. The large windows offered a view of Long Island Sound, painted in the sunset. I took a deep breath while sitting on the new sofa. The view from this high floor brought a sense of liberation, as if I had been released from all the previous pressure. With trembling fingers, I dialed Michael's number. After several rings, I finally heard his voice. "Michael, what I'm about to tell you might be hard to believe." I began speaking quietly but firmly. Just as I was about to tell him everything that had happened, a new message appeared on my phone screen. Sarah had sent photos of the house after the move. Looking at the pictures of the empty house, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Outside the window, the evening sky was beginning to turn deep purple. This color seemed to herald the beginning of my new life. The baby moved slightly in my belly, and placing my hand there, I began telling Michael about everything that had happened. That night, Patricia and Jenny returned home, carrying paper bags from Whole Foods. Those summer days are long. It was completely dark by this time. Warm light was beginning to leak from the windows of surrounding houses. However, their house alone was sunken in an unnatural darkness. How strange! Patricia frowned suspiciously as ancient maple trees swayed in the wind, their shadows casting eerie patterns on the ground in the moonlight. "Is that girl claiming to be sick again and sleeping? She's really useless," Jenny muttered, turning the key and opening the heavy front door. Her fingers found the light switch in the darkness, clicking it on. As the fluorescent lights brightened, both women gasped. "What is this?" The voice was almost a scream, as if they'd seen a ghost. The expensive console table, the antique mirror passed down through generations, everything was gone. Where vintage carpets should have been laid, only dusty footprints remained. On the walls, marks where paintings had hung stood out, as if mocking their past life. That woman couldn't have. Jenny rushed to where the china cabinet had been. Her precious wine glass collection, the complete set of limo dishes bought in Paris, all gone without a trace. A faint dust danced at her feet, the empty shelves displaying their miserable state. Patricia ran upstairs to check the second floor. The sound of her expensive heels striking the stairs echoed eerily in the empty house. "I can't believe this." Her cry from upstairs mixed anger and panic. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed unusually loud in the empty house. When they opened the door, 2 security guards in black suits stood there. "Excuse me, but who are you?" the stern-faced guard asked, requesting identification. Their attitude showed clear weariness. Just then, strong headlights shone in from outside. With the sound of tires crunching on gravel, car doors opened forcefully, and with hurried footsteps, Michael rushed in. It was a sudden return from Boston. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, his expression a mix of confusion, anger, and deep regret. "What on earth happened?" he asked breathlessly. His voice carried emotions that had been suppressed for years. Behind him, the security guards quietly but firmly monitored the situation. The night breeze blowing through the entrance created a faint echo in the empty house. Just then, I arrived from my new residence by car. The sound of my black Volvo slowly parking in front of the house cut through the tension-filled air. When I got out, the bandage on my arm stood out white in the night light. Everyone watched with bated breath as I carefully got out of the car with the characteristic movements of a pregnant woman. The moment Patricia tried to approach me, the security guards swiftly stepped between us. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right?" they asked, taking strategic positions to ensure my safety. Their movements showed the dignity of seasoned security professionals. "Kate, what's going on?" Michael walked toward me, his voice mixed with confusion and worry. At that moment, I quietly took out my smartphone. The screen of the latest iPhone clearly displayed the morning surveillance camera footage. The moment of the plate being thrown, the scene of me protecting my arm. Everything was recorded in detail. Though there was no sound, the situation was clear to anyone watching. "This is what happened this morning," I stated calmly. I felt my voice trembling slightly, but it wasn't from fear. Rather, it was from the exhilaration of being released from the previous pressure. I then took out important documents from my bag, the house deed from my grandfather's inheritance and the hospital diagnosis. "Actually, this house is in my name." The atmosphere froze. The silence was so complete you could hear everyone holding their breath as Michael read through the documents. His face gradually changed color, especially when he saw the photos from the medical report. His expression clearly turned to anger. Under the floor Yenti lights, his face grew pale. "Mother, sister, what is this?" His voice shattered the night's silence. I involuntarily flinched at its volume. "You threw a plate. Violence against my pregnant wife." His hands trembled as he gripped the medical report. Those hands showed intense emotions he had never displayed before. Jenny tried to make excuses. "Oh, my hand just slipped." However, Michael raised his hand with a stern expression, cutting off her words. His eyes held a determination I had never seen before. "That's enough," he said. Those 3 words carried an irreversible decision. Patricia attempted one last resistance, straightening her back as if summoning the dignity of an aged teacher. "Michael, we just—" But she swallowed her words at her son's cold gaze. At that moment, you could see the strength drain from her shoulders. "Stay away from us, both of you." Michael's voice was low but resolute. That voice held none of his previous indecisive attitude. "Security, please oversee these two's departure. Archer, have them pack only essential belongings and leave immediately." The clock striking 9 p.m. echoed with unusual weight. Patricia and Jenny began packing their essential items, accompanied by the security guards. They hurriedly stuffed their belongings into expensive designer bags. Their figures, having lost both dignity and arrogance, now looked like just a tired mother and daughter. Their shadows, cast by moonlight, stretched distorted on the wall as they glanced at the bandage on my arm. Michael softly whispered, "I'm sorry." His voice carried remorse for all the years past. A year later, our lives had changed dramatically. After my mother-in-law and sister-in-law left the house, accompanied by security guards, Michael immediately began preparing for our new life. We spent the first few months in a temporary apartment while working on the interior of the high-rise apartment that would become our new home. Finally, 2 months before the twins were due, we were able to move into our completed new residence. The view from the 42nd floor of the luxury Greenwich apartment is breathtaking. The waves of Long Island Sound sparkle like diamonds in the morning sun. Light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows casts soft shadows in the modern living room. Unlike our previous life, surrounded by heavy furniture, everything here is new and filled with our own style of living. "Good morning, Emily James." I approach the twin cribs and gently speak to the awakened twins. With their glossy black hair and almond-shaped eyes resembling Michael's, they look up at me with angelic smiles. After overcoming severe morning sickness in late pregnancy, these children were safely born to us last winter. I still vividly remember the surprise and joy when the doctor told us we were having twins. A dining table for breakfast is placed by the large windows in the living room. The aroma of freshly baked bread from the neighborhood organic bakery wafts over the table. The bright kitchen counter, decorated with house plants, already has the coffee maker set up, ready for a peaceful morning. This tranquil morning scene symbolizes the new life we've built over the year since that day. Michael, after successfully completing the Boston project last year, received a headhunting offer from a Silicon Valley company with better conditions. However, he chose to transfer to the consulting division of a Greenwich-based IT company to prioritize time with his family. His decision that time with you and the children is more important strengthened our bond even more. Indeed, he returns home on time every day and actively participates in child care, from bathing the twins to putting them to bed. We've also started enjoying more brunches with neighboring families on weekends. In particular, we maintain close relationships with Sarah and Linda, who helped us that day. After the twins were born, they volunteered to babysit. "Your happiness is our happiness." Linda's words always warm my heart. We've also made friends in the apartment community who share child-raising information and support each other. Meanwhile, we occasionally hear news about Patricia and Jenny. They reportedly live in a cheap apartment in the suburbs. Their once elegant lifestyle has disappeared, and Jenny's real estate business has lost its reputation and can't achieve its former results. Particularly devastating was the loss of credibility in the church community. Those who knew Patricia's arrogant attitude found her violence against her grandchild unforgivable. Having lost her place at Sunday services, she moved to a different church, but couldn't regain her former influence. The most serious issue is the deterioration of the mother-daughter relationship. Living together in a small apartment, they apparently spend their days blaming each other. When Patricia accuses, "We could have handled it better," Jenny retorts, "Mother, you should have responded more calmly." Their conflict deepens daily, and though living together, they barely speak to each other. They can't live separately for financial reasons, yet show no signs of reconciliation. Their situation might be the natural consequence of their arrogance and jealousy. Ironically, the plate they threw at me was a wedding gift from the church women's group. The moment its fragments scattered became a turning point in their lives. Afterwards, the incident became a topic in the local community, passed down as a cautionary tale about domestic violence, especially violence against a pregnant woman. It was received as a grave sin in the Christian community. "Good morning, my loves." Michael enters the living room, smiling at the twins. He picks them up one by one, giving them gentle kisses. His former indecisive manner has vanished. He's now a husband who firmly protects his family with unwavering determination. Sometimes he shows a dark expression, remembering his mother and sister, but even that is healed by the twins' smiles. I stand by the window, watching the cityscape illuminated by the morning sun. The pressure of the past will never torment us again. The view from this high floor seems to reflect our family's bright future. The twins' laughter echoes through the room as a new day begins. Occasionally, when I touch the scar on my belly, the events of that day flash through my mind like a slideshow. But now they rest in my heart as precious memories that heralded the beginning of our new life.